This lesson will discuss understanding global variables. Topics include: what is a global variable? What is a local variable? What is the usefulness of global variables? How can you use global variables inside functions? Is there any danger using global variables? Is there any alternative to using global variables? And finally, what about $globals? Moving over to our first code example, as you can see on line 4, we create a variable, this is global, and assign a value. Any variable defined outside of a function or outside of a class is considered to be a global variable. On line 9, we assign a variable, however, within the context of a function. This is referred to as a local variable, and this variable will only be available inside the function itself. On line 11, we are attempting to echo the global variable, which of course will not work because the function is unaware of the existence of variables outside of itself. On line 13, we echo the local variable, which will work fine. On line 17, we execute the function. On line 21, we echo the global variable, which will work fine. On line 23, we attempt to echo the local variable, which of course will not work because local variables are only visible within the function itself. Moving now to the browser, let's have a look at the result. So as you can see, the attempt to echo the global variable failed from inside the function. The local variable came back fine. Outside the calling program, the global variable is visible, but the local variable is not visible. What if you want to use a global variable inside a function? The answer is shown on the second code example. Very slight change. On line 11, we used the keyword global to identify the variable as a global variable. This allows us to use the variable inside the function. Accordingly, line 12 will work fine because the global variable has been identified, therefore it has been defined. Moving now to the browser, let's have a look at the output. So as you can see, calling from inside the function, we now have the global and the local variable. From outside the program, again, only the global variable is available. This brings up an important question, however. Is it considered good practice to use global variables inside your function? The answer is, it might be better to consider using parameters rather than global variables. Let's have a look at the third code example. In this example, we are defining a parameter $global. On line 15, when we call the function, we're supplying the value of the variable, this is global, to the function, which allows us to pass the information into the function in the form of a parameter, which we can then utilize inside the function for the purposes of the program. So the best practice would be to use parameters rather than relying on global variables. This reduces the number of dependencies between the function and the calling program and allows you to pull the function out and use it in another website without having to also make sure that you define the global variables. Moving to the browser, let's have a look at the output. So as you can see, no problem at all. The global variable is available now outside the program and inside the program because it was passed as a parameter. Finally, let's have a look at our fourth code example. In this example, we are examining a super global, which is called $globals. It's created automatically by PHP, and it is in fact an associative array of all global variables defined within the program. Let's go ahead and go to the browser and have a look at $globals. So as you can see, we have a list of all of the global variables that have been defined, which includes this is global 1, some value, which has a value of 22.47, and some Boolean, which is assigned a value of true. Moving back to the code, again, we're simply referencing $globals using var dump. It should be mentioned that $globals can be manipulated directly within your code. However, this is considered to be a somewhat dangerous practice as you can overwrite variables or create new variables with unintended consequences. In review, what is a global variable? A global variable is any variable defined outside of a function or outside of a class. What is a local variable? A local variable would be the opposite, a variable defined inside a function or inside a class. It should be noted that classes will be discussed when we get to the lesson on object-oriented programming. What is the usefulness of global variables? They can be used anywhere within your program, however, outside of functions and outside of classes, unless you use the keyword global inside the function to designate the variable as global. How can you use global variables inside functions? You would use the keyword global followed by the name of the variable, which would then allow you to utilize the variable as if it were defined within the function. Is there any danger using global variables? Remember that global variables are effective anywhere within the program. Accordingly, there is a situation which arises which is referred to as a dependency. So testing and debugging becomes much more difficult when you are utilizing global variables in functions, and also with large applications, it may be difficult later on to determine the effect of the global variable. Is there any alternative to using global variables? Of course, you could utilize an object-oriented approach, which is discussed in another chapter. Another approach would be to rely on functions as much as possible. And what about $globals? $globals is an associative array. It's automatically created by PHP. It's populated with the labels, which represent the variables, and the values of the variables. This is an array that allows access to all global variables created anywhere in your program. As we mentioned, the use of $globals should be restricted to reviewing it and analyzing the contents rather than trying to directly manipulate $globals. This concludes our discussion of understanding global variables.